Hello, this lecture is going to cover the U.S. involvement in World War I. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to jump right into it. All right, here we go. So U.S. involvement in World War I begins in the late 1910s, and it ends also in the 1910s. There's a lot of things that happened during this time. Where before America was more isolationist, meaning that they focused only on themselves, America becomes shows its might as a global power. After the war, though, America retreats back into isolationism until World War II, which we will cover in the coming weeks. A couple of things to remember is Woodrow Wilson is president. The progressives are continuing to reign during this time. And World War I changes America. You could argue for the better or for the worse, but it changes America. Also, the Spanish flu pandemic happens in 1918, towards the end of our involvement in the European World War I. And we will discuss some of that. There's also the Russian Revolution that happens during this time, which begins the emergence of the Soviet Union, which becomes our superpower counterpart all the way until they collapse in the 1990s. So for a total of almost 80 years, the Soviet Union is a contender for, well, it's our main threat to global dominance. Anyway, so we'll discuss a little bit about the Russian Revolution. It's kind of interesting. I might even go on a little tangent about monarchs and power, which is just a little taste of what world history will be for you. But anyway, we're going to jump into this. So why did it take so long for America to get involved in the war? America did not get involved into World War I until after the Zimmerman letter, which we'll discuss today. But we were not one of the major powers that got involved early on. We didn't get involved because we were more isolationist, which is something I discussed earlier, which just means that we focused on ourselves. We were like, no. We're not going to get involved in a European conflict. And this is something that reaches all the way back to President Washington, who issued a neutrality pact and began this idea of America needs to take care of America before they take care of anyone else. And this debate, by the way, guys, is something that even continues even into today, where we debate whether or not America should be an isolationist country, or if we debate or we can discuss whether or not America wants to be the policeman of the world and be out there and be involved and be a superpower of the global international community. Yeah, so these debates are something that go all the way through American history. So the main statement is, why should I get involved in someone else's problems, wars, conflicts, economics, anything like that? The Monroe Doctrine in 1823, issued by President James Monroe and written by John Quincy Adams, sought to isolate the American continents from European influences and problems. So Monroe Doctrine, written in 1823, basically says that America and the Western Hemisphere, this includes North and South America, will remain different and kind of like on its own away from Europe, the former colonial powers, right? And it's because of this doctrine that we continue to develop a strict sense of isolationist. The only war with Europe that there's two wars with Europe we fought before World War I, and that is the War of 1812, which was actually fought on North America with the British and Canada. So it really wasn't like a war we fought in Europe. And the same with the Spanish-American War, which was to rid Cuba of colonial power. So again, that really wasn't a war in Europe. It was a war in our hemisphere, fought with a European power, which is quite interesting. So we've never actually fought a war in Europe or on European soil until World War I. So we really did stick to our isolationist until then. So this is our thinking slide. So is isolationism really an option for a country as powerful as the United States? This is an amazing debate, right? Yes, it is an option. Does it hurt us economically? You could argue yes or no. Overall, it's extremely complicated, but I do think that there can be a good balance between isolationism and being a global power. I think the U.S. can find a balance there, and we should find a balance. And it makes things a little bit easier for us on both instances, because we should take care of ourselves sometimes, while at the same time we should, or maybe we shouldn't, depending on who you are, and that's fine. You can have those beliefs. But yes, isolationism it's very hard, especially now in today's global world, for the U.S. to take care of only itself. But yes, it can be done. What are the disadvantages of isolationism? So some of the disadvantages are you're not involved into a global market. Technology and cultural exchange doesn't occur. It does occur to an extent, but not as easily. So if you're looking at today's world, if you're looking even in 1914, the ability for countries to communicate back and forth and to exchange culture and ideas and technology and innovations, if you're more isolationist, this becomes a little harder. Some of the advantages are the complete opposite of that, right? So some of the advantages of isolationism is you take care of yourself. You don't get involved in war. Your citizens aren't dying in other people's conflicts or disagreements, and things like that. So the American response to World War I is neutrality. We believed that America should remain neutral. We will trade with both parties to maintain our economics, but we will not get involved and kill American boys abroad. Economic, cultural, and linguistic ties with Britain. So we're already a little bit, fonder of the British because of that's our kindred blood and stuff like that. Most Americans were anti-German, especially after they discovered plans for industrial sabotage. So the Germans wanted to destroy the American industrial power because they believed that we would join with the Brits. And so they sabotaged our industrial trade and commerce. So World War I was a boom, though, to the United States economy. Britain and France bought products in great amounts from our shores. American bankers gave private loans to the Allies in Europe, and some of the German threats escalate. Germans kept out of American trade by the British blockade, but they began submarine warfare around the British Isles to break through the blockade, and the Germans warned the U.S. might sink merchant ships. So this is this is the map of World War I. The red is the Central Powers, which is Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey. And these countries are what the Allies are fighting, which are, France, Portugal, Ireland, England, Russia, Ukraine, Italy, Greece. They're fighting the red. Neutral powers, it's always Switzerland. The Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Spain are neutral during World War I. So submarine warfare, the Germans warned Americans that their merchant ships might be hit, and it reaches a crisis point after Lusitania, which is the sister ship to Titanic, is torpedoed in 1915, and 128 Americans die on the ship. And after sinking of the British and the French liners, Germans promised they would not seek an unarmed ships without exploring. This is without warning. Sorry, this is called the Sussex Pledge. The Germans warned British their passenger liners were in danger, and England still sailed the Lusitania from New York to England. And a German U-boat torpedoed the Lusitania in May of 1915. It sunk in 18 minutes. 2,000 people were on board, and 1,200 died, including 128 Americans. And the ship was carrying a secret cargo of war materials. Wilson still wanted the U.S. to stay neutral and campaigned for re-election on the promise to keep us out of the war. So he wins re-election in 1916, and the progressives die out in the election after Roosevelt refuses to run again. Wilson wins over Charles Evans Hughes. With his promise, he kept us out of the war. Very close election, and Wilson's victory, Charles Evans Hughes, sorry, was the guy that was running against Wilson. I apologize. Very close election. Wilson's victory is linked to his promise to further neutrality. But then there's the Zimmerman Note in 1917. And this is where this gets a little fun. So it's sent by the German Foreign Secretary to Arthur Zimmerman in Mexico. It was intercepted and decoded by the British, and the telegram stated that Germany would again begin unrestricted submarine warfare. Even worse, the telegram proposes an alliance between Germany and Mexico. Germany promises they will help Mexico get the land back from the Mexican-American War. So in the 1840s, if you don't remember, quick flashback into history, America invades Mexico and takes all of the West. when you think about California, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Idaho, parts of Oregon, and Texas. All of those states, Colorado, were all a part of Mexico. We take that land, we conquer Mexico City, and we take what we want. Germany wants to propose an alliance to keep us occupied in our own hemisphere instead of coming to Europe. And then they promise to help Mexico get their land back in the West. This is huge, guys, because what Germany is trying to do is get Mexico to join the war and attack us, which brings us into the war. So this is a direct threat to American sovereignty as a country and to American territory. And this is the Zimmerman note. So America enters the war in 1917. Germany announces an unrestricted submarine warfare of America. The U.S. finds a Zimmerman note on 1917, and the overt acts. German U-boats sank 4 unarmed American merchant vessels in 2 weeks that were heading to Europe for trade. And on April 6, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson asked the United States to declare war because of these German actions against the American commerce. So how is the war looking for the Allies? It's not good when we join. Russia has left the war after its communist revolution in 1917, and Russia's withdrawal allowed Germany to fight a one-front war with all of its troops concentrated on the French front. And remember this point when we get to World War II, because that's called the Maginot Line. It gets a little crazy. So this is a photo of calling for a communist revolution. Anti-Tsarist protesters gather outside the Winter Palace in Russia in February of 1917. So the Bolsheviks, who were communists, overthrew the Russian government. And the Bolsheviks were led by Vladimir Lenin. In 1918, the Russians signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with the Central Powers. So quick, well, fun history. If I don't know if I'm going to do it. I might leave that. Yeah, I'm going to leave it for world history. Sorry, guys. I don't want to get off on a tangent here because when I get off on one, I won't stop. So how do we convince the American people to care about a war in Europe? This is insane because you have to remember not only was the American government not wanting to get involved in World War I, but also the American people. They really didn't see a reason to go fight in Europe. They didn't care. So how does the American government get the American people to care about a war in Europe? They do this by posters, which sounds kind of funny in today's world, but posters. And how do you think these posters in particular helped to convince the American people that the war was a good idea? So this poster over here is a woman in a sailor's uniform questioning manhood. And it says, gee, if I were a man, I'd join the Navy. Be a man and do it. United States Navy needs you. So that's using propaganda to question manhood, to get men to join up and fight. The first call, I need you in the Navy this minute. Our country will always be proudest of those who answer the first call. So this is saying if you want to be a good American, you'll join the war and help the American war effort. If you don't want to be a good American, you won't join the war. So getting public support for the war, these work. And you could argue whether or not that's a good or bad thing, but they do work. The world must be made safe for democracy. President Woodrow Wilson, this is the Southern Pacific Lines. That's a railroad line. Difficult is given traditions of isolationism and neutrality. Remember, it's rooted all the way back to Washington's administration, the first president, back in the 1790s. Wilson casts war in moral terms. So Wilson says we have to make the world safe for democracy. And this played on people's ideas of the American ideal of representation and freedom and democracy and liberty, and that we must be the savior for the monarchies of Europe. You have to remember, America is rooted in this idea that we are not a monarchy, that we are idealistic, and we believe in individual and personal freedom. And it is this belief that makes us want to help the people in Europe be freer. And this is where this comes from, this idea that and this is why even today we are not isolationist as much, because we want to provide that freedom, that ideals that we have and hold dear as Americans to other people around the world. So you have to remember, in Europe at this point, there's still massive amounts of tradition and monarchy and prestige and dukes and lords and ladies and duchesses and all of these things. And America wants that to all end, and we want democracy to flow into Europe. And that's what Woodrow Wilson is saying here. Let us provide freedom to European people. Now, you could all argue whether or not that happens or not. The point is, that's what Woodrow Wilson uses to get the American people motivated to going to Europe and joining up. So the U.S.'s position as its entry into World War I is that most Americans wanted to stay neutral. Why fight a war that was 3,000 miles away? The U.S. tried to maintain trade with both allies and Central Powers, but Americans eventually supported our involvement on the side of the allies for two reasons. The first is an ensured Allied repayment of the debts to the United States, and the second is to prevent Germans from threatening the United States shipping. Our commerce is what keeps us alive, and the Germans were threatening that, and we must defend it. So the United States mobilizes for war. The Selective Service Act is passed by Congress, and men between 21 and 30 are to be drafted. So this is where the draft is invented. Before, like during the Civil War, there was a draft, but it's not something that stayed as law. The War Industries Board meets the war demand, and they raise taxes and issue Liberty bonds. General John J. Pershing leads the United States troops known as the American Expeditionary Force, or the AEF. And unlike European soldiers who were fighting for 3 years, Americans were energetic, fresh, young, and arrogant. Propaganda in the war. The government created the Committee of Public Information, headed by George Creel. The goal is to sell the war to the American people and convince the world of the righteousness of Woodrow Wilson's war aims, which are, remember, American ideals to be spread abroad, and to create what we call the League of Nations, which is, it's like a pre-United Nations. Posters, movies, and songs are all created to encourage the support of the war effort. And anti-Germanism is on the rise. This doesn't end until after World War I, by the way. Hate the Germans. That's basically the message. So this is the Mad Brute. Destroy this Mad Brute and enlist. So the Mad Brute is the Germans, and the woman is American and innocents and citizens. Defend our country. Enlist now in the United States Army. Uncle Sam. This is where Uncle Sam, by the way, like gets really used as this, like, we want you. So government excess, threats to civil liberties of Americans. The Espionage Act in 1917 is passed, which forbade actions that obstructed recruitment or efforts to promote insubordination within the United States military, and it ordered the Postmaster General to remove leftist materials from the mail. Fines up to $10,000 and or up to 20 years in prison. The Sedition Act in 1918 was passed. It was a crime to speak against the purchase of war bonds or willfully utter, print, write, or publish any disloyal, profane, or abusive language about this form of the United States government, the U.S. Constitution, or the U.S. Armed Forces, or to willingly urge, incite, or advocate any curtailment of production of things necessary or essential to the prosecution of the war, which intent of such curtailment to cripple or hinder the U.S. in the persecution of the war. Okay, I want to talk about that one for a moment. So this is crazy. First of all, John Adams signs this exact same bill in the late 1700s during his one-term presidency. He literally loses re-election because of signing that act. It's called the Alien and Sedition Acts. I have to make a plug for John Adams because that's my guy. So sorry, but I think it's important to note this basically restricts civil liberties in the United States. The act is taken away after the end of the war, but the issue is that the government passed this act, and it's a direct violation of the civil liberties and the Civil Rights Acts of the 1800s. So this is a court case in 1919. In ordinary times, the mailing of the leftists would have been protected by the First Amendment, but every act of speech must be judged according to the circumstances in which it has been spoken. If an act of speech posed a clear and present danger, then Congress had the power to restrain such speech. So the Supreme Court upholds the Sedition Act and said that it is legal. Council of National Defense. So the War Industrials Board, Bernard, I don't know how to say that guy's name. The Food Administration, Herbert Hoover. He becomes president later. Buckle up. He's the Great Depression. Railroad Administration, William McAdoo. And the National War Labor Board, W.H. Taft and Frank P. Walsh. U.S. Food Administration, the world cry, food, keep the home garden going. So this was an idea that if everybody grew their own food, we could get food shipped to Europe, because remember, not only, this is key, are we feeding Americans at this point, but we're helping feed all of Europe because they're focused on a war instead of growing crops for their people. Eat cane syrup and molasses. Save the sugar by using the best. And so this is basically saying sugar and molasses equal the same. We need the sugar to go to Europe, so don't eat as much of it in America. What are you doing? The Kaiser is canned food. Can your vegetables and fruit, and the Kaiser too. So if you keep canning your food to put back so that you can keep it for your family. In other words, just ration. You're just rationing because we have to support so much more people. So if you garden, you can it. This is the School Garden Army. Follow the Pied Piper and join the United States School Garden Army. So this would just be like if I was your teacher, which I am, but like we would go out and we would have a garden in the school and we would all garden together so that the food would be processed for everybody to eat. So this is basically saying to you, the students, join the school garden so that we can grow food for the people. So the result of this new organization of the economy, unemployment virtually disappeared. It's an expansion of big government, excessive government regulations within the economy, and an unprecedented opportunity for disadvantaged groups, women and minorities, and this will be discussed next week. And that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Sorry I didn't go on my rant about the Russian Revolution. Quick little update though, like that is hemophilia. If you want to look that up, it's a disease that stretches all the way from Queen Victoria all the way to, well, it ends, but my point is it's a blood disorder that basically brought about the Russian Revolution. So I'll see you in world history for that, but my point is it's really, really cool. If you want to know more about that, shoot me an email. Be happy to tell you, or we can talk about it on Wednesday on a Zoom call or something. So, all right. I'll see you next time, guys. Have a good day.